Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week will be an important decisions made here on the House of Representatives floor. But we're told this month the Supreme Court may well play God and overrule what has been considered to be the laws of God as given by Moses for the dramatic amount of history, including up through the president's own statement that he believed marriage was just between a man and a woman when he was running for office, apparently according to his campaign manager or whatever he is, whatever he was, that they felt he wouldn't get elected if he said what he really believed. But nonetheless, in 6.5 years, we're told things have changed to the point we're now in a position to overrule what Moses says, that a man will leave his father and mother, and a woman leave her home, and the two will come together. That would be marriage. Moses, who's the only full-face profile above us in the gallery with the side profiles of all the lawgivers, the greatest lawgivers, as they were thought to be years ago. I will also note that as I sat and listened to the Supreme Court entertaining arguments on whether or not Texas could keep our monument dedicated to the Ten Commandments on our state capitol grounds, and it was joined with a case from Kentucky on whether they could keep their 10 commandments that were posted inside the door, as they were arguing about whether or not the 10 commandments could be attributed in that manner. I looked up on the marble wall to my right in the Supreme Court chambers, and there's Moses looking down with both tablets of the 10 Commandments looking down. Interesting, very interesting, the kind of mental gymnastics that have been played in the Supreme Court throughout its history. We know Dred Scott was a dreadful decision. There have been others that were poor. Sometimes, being human, they get them right. Sometimes they get them wrong. But there is one thing that is very, very, very clear. And it's in the United States Code, it's United States law, and it's Volume 28 of the United States Code, Section 455. And Section A is very clear. Any justice, judge, or magistrate judge of the United States shall, no room for question, shall disqualify himself, that's generic, meaning mankind, it could be male or female, in any proceeding in which his impartiality might reasonably be questioned. That is the law. And the only way that we can remain a nation that believes in the rule of law is if the courts that decide whether a law can stand or must fall abide by the laws that apply to them. If the highest court in the United States blatantly violates the law, and especially blatantly violates the law in deciding a case, then is it really law that they've made if they violated the law to create it? So knowing that the law is very clear, a Supreme Court justice, a United States justice, shall disqualify him or herself in any proceeding in which his impartiality might reasonably be questioned. Then we must next look to see if there's any indications of partiality on the part of any of the Supreme Court justices. Here's an article published by FoxNews.com back in September 1st, 2013, and it says the following. 2 months after the Supreme Court's landmark ruling to expand federal recognition of same-sex marriages, striking down part of an anti-gay marriage law, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg officiated at a same-sex wedding. The officiating is believed to be a first for a member of the nation's highest court. Ginsburg officiated Saturday at the marriage of Kennedy Center President Michael Kaiser and John Roberts, a government economist. And I was just out at the Kennedy Center this weekend, maybe the only weekend. I'm here in Washington all year, and delight to be there. Apparently, if Michael Kaiser's still president, he's doing what appears to be an excellent job there. But further down in the article, it says, and it's quoting Justice Ginsburg, quote, "I think it will be one more statement that people who love each other and want to live together should be able to enjoy the blessings and the strife in the marriage relationship," unquote, Ginsburg told the Washington Post in an interview. Quote, "It won't be long before there will be another," unquote, performed by a justice. She has another ceremony planned for September. The last line on that page, well, it's not the last of the article, but it says, "Justices generally avoid taking stands on political issues." Rest of the article goes on, "While hearing arguments in the case in March, Ginsburg argued for treating marriages equally. The rights associated with marriage are pervasive," she said. Anyway, it says further down, "Before the court heard arguments on the Defense of Marriage Act, Ginsburg told the New Yorker magazine in March that she had not performed a same-sex marriage and had not been asked. Justices do officiate at other weddings, though. Quote, "I don't think anybody's asking us because of these cases," unquote, she told the magazine. Quote, "No one in the gay rights movement wants to risk having any member of the court be criticized or asked to recuse. So I think that's the reason no one has asked me," unquote. Asked whether she would perform such a wedding in the future, she said, "Why not?" And the Associated Press apparently also contributed to that report. But it doesn't sound as if it could be any more clear that Justice Ginsburg has a very solid opinion that gay marriage, same-sex marriage, same-sex weddings are constitutional, despite that being something that is reserved to the states and the people under the 10th Amendment for decisions. Then September 22nd of 2014, in The Hill, written by Peter Sullivan, the article says this, "Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan officiated at a same-sex wedding on Sunday," a court spokeswoman told us the Associated Press. The ceremony in Maryland for a former law clerk is the first same-sex wedding that Kagan has performed. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and retired Justice Sandra Day O'Connor have both performed same-sex weddings in the past. Gay marriage has been a divisive topic at the Supreme Court, as it has been elsewhere in the country. Further down, the article says the court could decide as early as this month whether to take up the issue again in the coming session, this time to consider a more sweeping ruling declaring a right to same-sex marriage across the country. Ginsburg said last week that unless an appeals court allows a gay marriage ban to stand, quote, "There is no need for us to rush," unquote, on a Supreme Court ruling. Clearly, Justice Kagan has made her feelings clear on same-sex marriage. There could not be a more clear, unequivocal statement that any judge or justice could ever make on the issue of same-sex marriage than to actually perform, officiate in a same-sex wedding. Here's a Newsmax article from May 18th, 2015, by Greg Richter. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg sparked speculation on Sunday when she mentioned the Constitution while officiating a same-sex wedding. Further down, it quotes her as saying, quote, with a sly look and, I'm sorry, this is a quote from Maureen Dowd, New York Times columnist, quote, with a sly look and a special emphasis on the word Constitution, Justice Ginsburg said that she was pronouncing the two men married by the powers vested in her by the Constitution of the United States, unquote, Dowd wrote. Then it also says in the article, nevertheless, guests applauded loudly, Dowd said, and Ginsburg, quote, seemed delighted, unquote. For Justice Ginsburg to state publicly that the Constitution of the United States gives her the power to officiate and unite a same-sex couple in marriage is an unequivocal, clear statement as to what she believes the Supreme Court should do in their decision. If there was ever any doubt, and there wasn't, once she performed a same-sex wedding, there was no question about her feelings on the matter. An article from National Review by Edward Whelan, February 19th of this year. The article, just a small part of it here. Her Supreme Court confirmation hearing in 1993, Ruth Bader Ginsburg repeatedly explained that the judicial obligation of impartiality required that she give, quote, no hints, no forecasts, no previews, unquote, about how she might, quote, vote on questions the Supreme Court may be called upon to decide, unquote. As she declared in her opening statement, and then she's quoted, a judge sworn to decide impartially can offer no forecasts, no hints, for that would show not only disregard for the specifics of the particular case, it would display disdain for the entire judicial process. That was Ruth Bader Ginsburg in 1993. Apparently, she sees things a great deal differently now. Further down in the article, Edward Whelan writes, human nature being what it is, it's not easy for a justice to recuse in a closely divided case that she obviously cares passionately about. This is exactly the situation Justice Scalia faced years ago in the wake of his public comments criticizing a Ninth Circuit ruling against the Pledge of Allegiance. As Slate's Dahlia Lithwick wrote at the time, Scalia was intellectually honest enough to know that he slipped, unquote. And he thus, quote, recused himself from what would have been one of the most important church-state cases of his career, unquote. His recusal meant, quote, the court may well split 4-4 on the case, in which case the Ninth Circuit's decision will stand for all the states in its jurisdiction. We also have a quote from Justice Sonia Sotomayor, quote, I suspect even with us giving gay rights to marry, that there's some gay people who will choose not to, just as there's some heterosexual couples who choose not to marry. So we're not taking anybody's liberty away. Justice Sotomayor has obviously stated her position very clearly on the issue of same-sex marriage. This is an article from May 27, 2009, Lisa Keene from the Keene News Service. She says in the article, longtime gay legal activist Paula Edelbrick said she met Sotomayor in about 1991 when they both served on then New York Governor Mario Cuomo's advisory committee on fighting bias. Quote, nobody wanted to talk to the, and uses a slur for homosexual person at that time, unquote, said Edelbrick, who represented Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund. Quote, she was the only one on the advisory committee who made a point to come over and introduce herself. She was totally interested in gay civil rights issues and supportive, unquote. Evan Wilson, head of the National Freedom to Marry organization, said, quote, from everything I know, Judge Sotomayor is an outstanding choice, fair and aware, open and judicious. I believe she's demonstrated the commitment to principles of equal protection and inclusion that defines a good nominee to the Supreme Court. Wilson said the president, quote, has made a strong and appealing nomination that should and will receive the support of those committed to equality for lesbian and gay men. The National LGBT Bar Association issued a statement saying it was pleased with the choice, noting that it represents, quote, more diversity on the bench. In view, actually, of her quote, it seems that she has clearly stated her position with regard to same-sex marriage. Anyway, the article further down said Kevin Cathcart, executive director of Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund, said the organization was pleased that the nominee is a woman of color. Quote, while women, people of color, and self-identified gay people continue to be woefully underrepresented in the federal judiciary, Judge Sotomayor's nomination represents a step in the right direction, quote, Cathcart said. So anyway, if those quotes are accurate, then certainly they would be supporting evidence of her quote that I suspect even with us giving gay rights to marry, she's already stating in this quote that she, not the Creator, God, not Almighty God, not the Constitution, us giving, obviously the Supreme Court. So as Jefferson pointed out, you know, he trembles for the country when he realizes that God is just and his justice will not sleep forever. It's not the Supreme Court that gives rights. We get our rights according to the Declaration of Independence from our Creator. And they're embodied, were supposed to have been embodied in the Constitution. And yes, it took a civil war to ensure that the Constitution meant what it said. And it took an ordained Christian minister named King to push until peacefully until such time as the Constitution was more thoroughly forced to mean what it said. We're talking about marriage here. For anyone who is a Christian, that means they believe in Jesus Christ. They believe he's Savior. And they would have to believe when he quoted Moses, who said he was giving the law from God. And Jesus said, a man shall leave his father and mother, and a woman leave her home, and the two will become one flesh. And what God joined together, let no one put asunder. He put his stamp. This is marriage. It approved what Moses said was marriage. And in this nation, throughout the nation, till some said we've become smarter than we've ever been, once again defying Solomon's statement, there's nothing new under the sun. This is not new. We're no more enlightened than other civilizations have been. But if the Supreme Court, in a majority decision, destroys the constitutions of numerous states across this nation, and the majority opinion has justices who are violating federal statute regarding what a judge shall do, then it would appear that their law would be no more valid than if someone here cast the deciding vote on legislation that becomes law, and it's determined that the deciding vote were cast by someone who was not legally a member of Congress. There would be reason to say that's not a valid law. It did not pass the House of Representatives, and especially if it turned out that, say, 20, 30, 40% of those casting the majority votes on a bill were disqualified at the time of the vote from casting a vote. That would not be a legitimate law. I hope, and since I believe in prayer, I pray that those justices who have made clear by their statements and their actions that they are disqualified will do the lawful thing and recuse themselves. If they do not do that, they will be casting a ballot, and if casting a vote, and if that vote is the majority decision, and if that decision overturns massive law on marriage across the country, and then by its statement says we know more than Moses, we know more than Jesus, we're the U.S. Supreme Court, it certainly sounds like they will have produced an unlawful decision of the Supreme Court. I hope they will not put this nation to such a constitutional crisis by violating the law to push through their legislative agenda. But we will see. Will they start a constitutional crisis by violating the law to push through their legislative agenda through their court? We'll see. I hope and pray that they'll follow the law and disqualify themselves. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.